Hi, welcome everyone to another episode of Let's Talk Special Economic Zones. I'm your host, Ainsley Brown, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about shared services or using shared services or viewing shared services within a zone as a non-fiscal incentive. Now, when we talk about zones, sometimes there is a little challenge in the nomenclature, what exactly constitutes a zone, because you'll have different names, free zones, free trade zones, industrial parks, etc., etc. It's all the same thing. It basically is a area designated by or delineated, as they say, by geography that has by a government that has special incentives associated with it, and maybe at times different laws, different rules that apply to it as compared to the rest of the economy. And these are created in order to stimulate investments, whether local or foreign, but primarily focused on foreign investments in terms of bringing in capital, new ideas, and creating new types of jobs. Now, when it comes to looking at incentives, there are different types, of course. There are the typical fiscal incentives. When we talk about incentives, this is what we mean, or typically what's meant, and those are the tax breaks, right? A reduction as compared to the rest of the economy in terms of your corporate income tax, or no duties on importation of items, things like that, right? Tax breaks. There are also financial, which are not as typical in the whole sphere of incentives, or especially with zones, but they do exist. Financial incentives where governments actually fork out money, give money to folks to carry out activities or come into their country and invest. This can be like discounts on rents, or it can actually be actual cash, like a grant to the investor. But more typically, you'll find that there are non-fiscal incentives. These are the third type, and what they are, they're neither financial or nor are they fiscal. Um, and what they are typically are government services done in a very efficient way. Maybe there is a fast line in customs clearance. So maybe let's say it takes a few days to clear a container at the port normally. In this instance, you may get it in 24 hours or less. Things like that are considered non-fiscal incentives. Now, we're going to look at shared services. That means services that are in the zone, and they're shared amongst all the participants within the zone, the occupants within the zone. Um, Now, that can come in many forms. It can come in the form of, say, logistics services, a shared warehouse, for example. It can come in the form of a labor pool that's shared amongst different folks, and then they pull down on what they need, as the need arises. But those folks are assigned to that zone. It can be daycare services, healthcare services, and I'll do a future episode quite shortly about this cooling as a service, whether that be from, say, LNG, regasification of LNG, or it could be solar powered, or other renewable source, etc. Um, Electricity is another one that could be in terms of shared services. The list goes on. It's endless. Maintenance services. So these are shared amongst the occupants. Now, before we get to what that looks like or how that could look like, because it's going to vary in either case, first we have to have it based on the regime. It must be allowable, right? It must be allowable within the regime. If it's not allowable, then there's nothing there to do. It's just not permissible. And whether you have a zone that is wholly owned by a government, this makes it a little bit easier to do, because they own, control, regulate the zone, and then they can implement and institute or even use it as a means to attract investors to say, come to my zone. My zone has healthcare facilities. If it's services, particularly services that are, high value services. Say I have healthcare, I have daycare, childcare services, and these are things that you can tap into at a subsidized rate, or it's free, or whatever it is, right? This is part of what we're offering as a destination for you to come and invest. That's easier. Now, if it is a private zone, a zone where, or your model is based more on or private sector led development. So private sector comes in and either, whether it's a PPP. Again, that could be a little bit easier too, because it could be a condition within the public-private partnership for the PPP, to build out these shared services spaces and bring in people to do it, or the government could um, either subsidize it or actually run it in order to be part of that whole investment attraction. Uh, but if it's pure private, then first the legislation must allow it. So if we check that box across that hurdle, that's fantastic. Then we can start to look into the private models, and how that is going to be used by a person developing a zone as a way to attract folks, just like people build green buildings, green certified buildings to attract folks to their buildings, and have the ability to charge higher rents. Likewise, there is the possibility of that too, in terms of saying, hey, we have these services here that you can tap into, that will enhance your competitiveness as a company, making us more attractive to you. And you can come in and use these services. And, so it's a mindset thing in terms of looking at it as a non-fiscal incentive and a way to attract folks, and how you market your regime to say this is allowed or this is allowable. And so you can have a rec center, or some sort of recreational facility for workers to go and relax, and etc in there, and it's shared. How it's paid for, it could be that there is a surcharge or a certain levy that's on the occupants. It could be that the government subsidizes it, by either offering, incentives for it to be done. Um, it could be that there's a whole host of things that can be done there. Um, it's also, I should say, that you know, in terms of designing it, and this is becoming increasingly important. I should have said this earlier. This is becoming increasingly important because of the tightening policy space that exists in terms of offering fiscal incentives, due to the global corporate minimum income tax, or Pillar Two of the inclusive framework from the OECD, that is slowly rolling itself out as more and more countries start to sign up for it and implement domestic legislation to implement it. And it won't take much or many countries. It will take a few key ones to really implement it for it to basically be live, because there's only what, for most foreign direct investment comes from a handful of countries, right? Handful of countries, the United States, the UK, Japan, South Korea, um, Sweden, those basically the OECD countries, to be frank, France, Germany, etc. These countries constitute the largest block of foreign direct investment. China as well, although they're not in the OECD, but they're a massive FDI exporter, so to speak. Um, Once they implement, or several of them, which they're starting to, when some have already done so, implemented the global corporate minimum income tax, it's basically going to be a global thing, whether you sign up for it or not, right? Or you've implemented local legislation to bring it into effect into your jurisdiction. Now, seeking out other means to stay competitive now going forward in, we're at the end of 2023 now. We're going into 2024 is going to be increasingly important to countries that have implemented special economic zones, um, and other such types of mechanisms, because the space is tightening, it's becoming tighter. So using shared services, making sure first that it's allowed, incentivizing it, so that, the private sector, if they are, the ones, if your zone model has it that they're the leads in terms of development and operation of zones. And even if they're not, it could be that it's a government own and run zone. You still need to incentivize it to have people actually use it. And, further, certain subsidies may be necessary, limited, I would say, and time bound. And, but shared services is one area that definitely, zone operators, zone developers, zone, policymakers need to really look into, because it's an area that could definitely be tapped into to um, make your zone more attractive. Now, in my next episode, I'm going to do the cooling as a service, which is a specific form of, as a specific opportunity and a specific shared service that I think, is very appropriate for zones, and is actually could be, it's not yet, could be a major moneymaker, I believe. So if you like this episode, please like, share, subscribe. If you want to see me do a particular episode or a particular topic on a episode on a particular topic, just leave me a comment down below and I'll get right back to you. Bye for now.